You'd never find the station unless you were looking for it, or more accurately, unless it was looking for you. There's no sign on the highway, no glowing advertisements, no familiar corporate logos. Just a cracked asphalt turnoff that snakes away from the main road and disappears into the pine-dark mountains. That's where I work. A place I've been told I should never call by name. A place where the rules aren't just suggestions, they're the only thing keeping you alive. When I first took the job, I thought it was a joke. The ad was short, almost cryptic. Night guard needed. Remote service station. Pay. Generous. Must follow instructions exactly. No phone number, no email, just a P.O. box. I was broke enough to answer. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from a man in a threadbare coat in the corner booth of a truck stop diner, sipping coffee I didn't order. He slid an envelope across the table without smiling. Inside were the keys to the gas station, an old laminated ID badge with my face already printed on it, and a single sheet of paper with 7 typed rules. They read: 1. Never leave the station between midnight and sunrise. 2. Never let the pumps run dry. 3. If a customer asks for the other road, tell them it doesn't exist. 4. Keep the front door locked after 2:13 a.m., no exceptions. 5. If the payphone rings, do not answer it. 6. If someone comes in who looks like you, do not speak. 7. Under no circumstances turn off the outside lights. The man didn't explain them. He just said, follow these, or you won't make it through your shift. I wanted to laugh, but his eyes, they were tired in a way I'd never seen before. That first night, I drove out to the station just before dusk. It sat alone in a gravel clearing, surrounded by walls of black pine that seemed to swallow the horizon. 2 rusting pumps stood out front, their faded numbers barely visible under the buzzing fluorescence of the canopy lights. The station building itself was squat and concrete, with a glass door that rattled when the wind picked up. A flickering, open sign clung stubbornly to life in the front window. Inside smelled like dust, gasoline, and something faintly metallic. There were 2 short aisles of snacks and canned goods, a cooler of sodas in the back, and a counter with an ancient register. Behind the counter, a doorway led into the small staff area with a cot, a desk, and the grimy bathroom. It wasn't much, but it felt strange. Not dangerous yet. Just wrong. The shift started easy. A couple of late-night truckers stopped for gas. A woman in a heavy coat bought coffee and cigarettes without saying a word. Around 11:45 p.m., the traffic stopped completely. The silence was so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. I remembered Rule 1, never leave between midnight and sunrise, and locked the door out of habit. At 12:30, the first strange thing happened. A man in a faded denim jacket came in and asked for the other road. His voice was flat, but his eyes were sharp, studying my face like he already knew me. Rule 3. I forced a smile and told him, doesn't exist. He didn't argue. He just nodded once and walked out, not even buying anything. Through the glass, I watched him climb into a car that hadn't been there before and drive off into the trees, where there wasn't a road at all. By 1:50 a.m., I'd convinced myself it was just weird locals playing games. I stocked the shelves, swept the floor, checked the pumps. Everything was fine. But then 2:13 rolled around. I'd almost forgotten Rule 4 until I felt it, that prickling crawl on the back of my neck, like someone was standing behind me. The clock hit 2:13 exactly, and I slammed the front door shut, locking it tight. I didn't know why I was rushing, but something deep in my gut screamed at me to move faster. At 2:16, someone started knocking. I glanced up to see a man standing outside under the canopy lights. He was smiling, too wide. The skin at the corners of his mouth looked like it had been stretched. He didn't blink. His hands tapped on the glass in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. When I didn't move, his head tilted to the side, like a curious dog. I mouthed "We're closed" and backed away. His smile didn't falter. Then the lights above the pumps flickered. Just for a second, but enough for me to notice that when they came back on, he was closer to the door. I retreated behind the counter and kept my eyes down. My pulse thundered in my ears. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. When I finally looked again, he was gone. At 3 a.m., The payphone in the back started ringing. I stared at it, remembering Rule 5, don't answer. It rang slow, heavy, like each chime was dragging itself through molasses. I counted. 12 rings. Then silence. I exhaled in relief, until it rang again. This time it didn't stop. I put my hands over my ears, pacing in the staff area. The sound seemed to grow louder, closer, until it felt like it was coming from inside my skull. I was shaking, my nails digging into my palms, when suddenly, it stopped. The silence felt worse. I sat on the cot, trying to steady my breathing, when I heard the front door creak. My head snapped up. It was locked. I checked twice, but somehow it was open. And standing there in the doorway was me. Same jacket, same boots, same tired face. He didn't speak. Just looked at me with those same tired eyes I'd seen on the man in the diner. My stomach dropped. Rule 6. If someone comes in who looks like you, do not speak. We stared at each other. My double stepped inside, slow, deliberate. I backed away, my spine pressing against the wall. He moved past me without acknowledgement, walked behind the counter, and began adjusting things, turning the register slightly, aligning the candy bars, straightening the soda bottles in the cooler. He did it all without looking at me. When he was done, he walked to the door, paused, and glanced back. His lips moved soundlessly, like he was trying to form words but had forgotten how. Then he stepped outside and vanished into the dark. The rest of the night, nothing happened. No customers. No phone. Just me sitting on the cot, counting down the minutes until dawn. When the sun finally crept over the trees, I locked the pumps, shut off the register, and drove away without looking back. That night, I learned something important. The rules aren't there to make your life harder. They're there to make sure you still have one. I didn't want to go back for my second shift. Every instinct in my body told me to call that man from the diner, tell him I quit, and forget this whole thing ever happened. But the problem with jobs like this is that they find you. By noon the next day, a plain white envelope was sitting in my apartment's mailbox. No return address. Inside was my week's pay, already, and a short note in block letters. Shift starts 7 o'clock. Do not be late. It wasn't a request. I told myself the extra cash would be worth it. That maybe I'd imagined half of what happened the night before. Sleep deprivation, isolation, maybe even some local prank designed to scare new hires. That's what I kept repeating as I drove down that twisting, tree-choked road again. The station looked the same as always, but something in the air was heavier. The pine forest loomed closer than it had before, like the trees had crept forward during the day. I parked my car behind the building, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The first few hours were uneventful. A logging truck filled up. A man in a heavy flannel coat bought coffee. A quiet couple paid for gas in exact change, eyes fixed on the floor. The strange thing was, no one ever seemed to arrive from the road. I'd just look up from the counter, and they'd be there, as if they'd stepped out from between the shadows of the trees. By midnight, the station was empty. The fluorescent lights above the pumps buzzed and swayed faintly. I kept my eyes on the rule sheet I'd taped behind the register, reading each one like it was scripture. Never leave between midnight and sunrise. Never let the pumps run dry. If a customer asks for the other road, ***. The list was my lifeline. Around 12:45, I heard something strange. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching against the gravel outside. My skin prickled. I waited for the door to open, but it didn't. Instead, the steps circled the building. I stepped quietly into the staff area, grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight from the desk. The sound was just outside the back wall now. A scraping sound followed, like nails dragging along the siding. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. Then, silence. I waited, barely breathing. When I finally stepped back into the main shop, I froze. There was a man standing at pump 2. He was tall, impossibly thin, wearing a gray hoodie pulled low over his face. He wasn't getting gas. He wasn't moving. Just standing, facing the building. The pumps were on, their displays cycling idly, waiting for someone to lift a handle. But he didn't. I didn't want to open the door, but Rule 2 burned in my head. Never let the pumps run dry. If he'd been standing there for hours, maybe the system thought someone was fueling and wouldn't refill automatically. I tapped on the glass. "Sir? Need any help?" No response. Something deep in my gut told me not to open that door. I checked the gauge from inside. Pumps were still at capacity. Relief washed over me. I didn't have to go out there. But then he lifted his head. Even from inside, through the buzzing lights and smudged glass, I saw his face, or what was left of it. The skin from his nose down was gone, teeth bared in a permanent skeletal grin. His eyes were solid black, reflecting the canopy light like 2 drops of oil. I stumbled back, knocking over a rack of chips. When I looked again, he was gone. The rest of the hour passed in anxious silence until I glanced at the wall clock. 2:12 a.m. I rushed to the door and locked it just as the minute hand clicked forward to 2:13. That's when I noticed movement at the far end of the lot. Someone was walking toward the station. No, limping. Their body jerked with each step like their joints weren't working right. The figure reached the door and pressed a hand against the glass. It was a woman, if you could call her that. Her skin was pale and too tight over her bones, her jaw hanging slightly open as if unhinged. Her eyes rolled loosely in their sockets, never focusing on me. She knocked, softly at first, then harder. When I didn't move, she began to scream. It wasn't a normal scream, it was like hearing multiple voices layered together, rising and falling out of sync. I stumbled back, covering my ears. She kept going, the sound vibrating through my chest like it was coming from inside the building. Then, suddenly, silence. When I looked again, the doorway was empty. I checked the rules again, my hands shaking. Never leave between midnight and sunrise. I was starting to understand why. At 3:07, the payphone rang. The memory of last night's call came flooding back. This time I shoved the cot against the phone to muffle the sound, but it didn't help. The ringing was inside my skull again, sharp and needling, and this time there was a voice. A man's voice, low and urgent, whispering through the constant chime. I couldn't make out the words, but it was speaking fast, almost frantic. My ears burned. My head throbbed. I grabbed the flashlight and smashed the phone off the wall. The ringing stopped instantly. I was still catching my breath when I heard the front door creak open. My stomach dropped. I'd locked it. I knew I'd locked it. Standing in the doorway was a man in a trucker's cap, his face shadowed. He stepped inside slowly, like he belonged here. His boots left wet, dark prints on the tile. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just kept walking until he was standing right in front of the counter. Then he leaned forward, and I saw his eyes. They weren't eyes at all, just 2 deep, wet holes, black as tar, stretching back into nothingness. "You're gonna let the pumps run dry," he said in a voice like gravel. My heart lurched. I glanced at the gauge. It was still full. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." His grin widened. "We'll see." And just like that, he turned and walked out into the dark. I stood frozen, staring after him, until I heard it, the sound of liquid gurgling. I rushed to the pump gauge. The numbers were dropping fast. Something was draining them. I grabbed my jacket, ran out to the pumps, breaking rule 1, and stopped dead. The man was gone. The lot was empty. But the hoses were twitching, writhing like snakes, and from the ends dripped thick, black sludge instead of fuel. The smell hit me, rot, burned metal, and something chemical that made my eyes water. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door. The gauge steadied, but it was dangerously low. If the pumps hit 0 before sunrise, I didn't know what would happen. I didn't want to know. I spent the rest of the shift pacing the floor, flashlight in hand, staring out at the lot through the glass. When dawn finally broke, the sludge was gone. The hoses lay still. The gauge read full again, as if nothing had happened. But when I went to lock up, there was something new on the glass door. A perfect handprint, long fingers, nails like claws, burned into the glass. And it was on the inside. When I woke up the next day, my apartment smelled faintly of gasoline. I checked every corner, every closet, thinking maybe I'd tracked something in for my shift, but it wasn't that. The smell wasn't in the apartment, it was coming through the walls. I stuffed a towel under the door, turned on every fan I had, and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the station hadn't let me go home alone. I didn't want to go back that night, but the same white envelope was in my mailbox by noon, this time with no cash, just a note. The rules kept you alive. Do not test them. By the time I got to the station, the sun was bleeding out behind the pines. A heavy mist clung to the clearing, thick enough to blur the canopy lights above the pumps. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my stomach tight. The place smelled sharper tonight, like the gasoline scent from my apartment had followed me here and gotten stronger. At 10:30, a few customers wandered in. A delivery driver bought 2 sodas. A man with weathered hands and a too-wide smile filled up at pump 3. No one lingered. By midnight, the station was empty again. I kept my eyes on the rules. I knew the routine now. Strange visitors, knocks at the door, the phone, the doubles. I could handle it if I stayed sharp. But around 12:15, something changed. I saw movement at the edge of the tree line. A man stepped into the mist, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long, rain-soaked trench coat. He didn't approach the pumps or the door. He just stood there, halfway between the shadows and the light, his head tilted like he was watching me through the glass. The longer I looked, the less certain I was that his coat was wet. The dark streaks down the fabric weren't water. They were too thick, too slow to drip. He stood there for a long time, and then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the back of the station, disappearing from view. The back wall of the shop was solid concrete. No windows. No doors. I grabbed the flashlight and went into the staff room, listening hard. Nothing. No footsteps. No scraping. Just the hum of the old fridge in the corner. When I turned back toward the main shop, the smell of gasoline hit me like a wall, raw, chemical, almost sweet. It made my stomach turn. I stepped into the store and froze. The man in the trench coat was standing inside. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear anything at all. One moment he wasn't there, and the next, he was. His face was mostly shadowed beneath the brim of a soaked fedora, but I could see the glint of his eyes. And in his left hand, dangling casually at his side, was a black plastic gas pump nozzle. "You're running low," he said in a deep, gravelly voice. I glanced at the pump gauge. My stomach dropped. It was down to a quarter full. "What do you want?" I asked. He smiled faintly, thin, humorless. "Not me. Them." He tilted his head toward the forest, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw movement between the trees, shapes, low to the ground, crawling just beyond the mist. "Fill it back up," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Whatever you drained, put it back." The man's smile widened. "I don't drain it. I feed it." He stepped closer, and I realized the nozzle he was holding wasn't connected to any hose. The cut end was frayed, strands of rubber curling like dead vines. "What are you?" I whispered. "Same as you," he said. "Just been here longer." Something about the way he said it chilled me worse than anything else. I thought about the man in the diner, the tired look in his eyes. How many guards had there been before me? Before I could speak, the trench coat man's head twitched sharply toward the door. He froze, sniffed the air, then dropped the nozzle to the floor. "They're early tonight," he murmured. And then he vanished. Not walked away. Not ran. 1 second he was there. The next there was nothing but empty air and the faint echo of gasoline. That was when I heard the knocking. 2:13 a.m. I'd lost track of time. My hands shook as I locked the door, but the knocking was already there. Hard, deliberate. I didn't go near the glass this time. I stayed behind the counter, heart pounding, while the knocks grew louder, faster, like fists slamming wood. The sound changed, became wetter, meatier, until I could swear it was bare flesh hitting the glass. Then it stopped. I let out a shaky breath, and the phone rang. This time, I almost wanted to answer, just to have a human voice. But I stayed back, staring at the dangling, smashed receiver still hanging from the wall. The ringing didn't come from it. It came from the outside. I turned toward the door. The payphone, my payphone, was standing outside, right next to pump 1. The black cord stretched down into the gravel, disappearing into the mist. It rang again. And from the forest, something answered. A voice, deep, resonant, speaking in a language I didn't know, rolled through the trees. It made my teeth ache, my eyes water. My vision swam. The pumps began to twitch. The hoses jerked violently, as if pulled from underground. The gauge dropped. I stumbled back, panic gripping me. If they ran dry before sunrise, what? Would the things in the forest come closer? Would they take me? The phone stopped ringing. The forest went still. And then something hit the side of the building. Hard enough to rattle the shelves. Once. Twice. Again. The third strike cracked the plaster inside the wall. I backed into the staff area, every muscle ready to run, though I knew I couldn't. Rule 1. Never leave. The hits stopped. When I finally dared to look, there was a fresh mark on the wall, a handprint burned into the concrete itself. Longer than a man's, with too many fingers. I sat on the cot until sunrise, too afraid to move, every creak of the building sounding like footsteps. When the first light broke through the trees, the mark was gone. The pumps were full again. The payphone was back inside where it belonged. But as I was locking up, I noticed something carved into the inside of the counter. 7 words, scratched deep into the wood. The rules keep them out, not you. By the time my 4th shift rolled around, I'd stopped pretending this was just a job. It wasn't a job, it was a sentence. The rules weren't quirky guidelines to keep weird customers in line. They were a survival manual, one that barely kept me on the right side of alive. That morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to quit. I didn't care what the envelope said. I didn't care about the money. But when I opened my mailbox, there wasn't an envelope this time. Just a single key, rusted at the edges, with a tag that read, "You can't leave yet." The tag smelled faintly of gasoline. That night, I drove to the station slower than usual, headlights cutting thin beams through the fog that seemed to cling thicker with every mile. The forest on either side pressed closer, pine trunks like black pillars. When I arrived, the station looked wrong. The canopy lights above the pumps were dimmer, the open sign flickered in erratic bursts, and the pumps themselves were swaying slightly in the still air. Inside, the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. The rule sheet behind the counter seemed to glare at me. My eyes kept snagging on one in particular. 6. If someone comes in who looks like you, do not speak. ***. I'd already seen my double once. I prayed I wouldn't see him again. For the first couple of hours, nothing happened. A tired man in a pickup filled his tank. A woman in a floral dress bought a candy bar without meeting my eyes. At 11:47, the lot went still. It wasn't just quiet, it was dead. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights faded into nothing. That's when the door opened, and a man stepped inside. He was about my height, my build, wearing the same jacket I'd worn my first night here. His hair was damp, his skin pale. But there was something worse than the resemblance, something in the way his eyes looked at me. They weren't curious, or mocking, or empty. They were pleading. I remembered the rule and said nothing. He walked to the counter, slow and stiff, and placed something on it. It was a photograph. I recognized the man in the picture instantly, because it was him. My double. Standing right here in the station, smiling faintly, arms slung around the shoulders of someone I didn't recognize. A man in a faded trench coat. I looked up, but my double was gone. The photo lay on the counter like it had been nailed there. When I turned it over, my blood ran cold. Scrawled on the back, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "I broke Rule 1. The door rattled violently. I nearly dropped the photo. The glass shook under the impact of fists, too many fists, pounding in unison. I backed away, heart pounding. It wasn't just one person outside. Through the glass, I saw faces. Dozens of them. Pressed against the door, pale and grinning, eyes wide and unblinking. Some were smeared with dirt, some streaked with something darker. They were all knocking in the same slow rhythm. The clock read 2:12. I sprinted to the door and threw the lock just as the second hand ticked over to 2:13. The knocking stopped instantly. Then the phone rang. This time, I heard the voice clearly, hoarse, desperate. ***, don't let them in. Please. They... Asterisk. The line cut off with a shriek, like metal being dragged across glass. The pounding started again, but it wasn't on the door anymore. It was coming from the back wall. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped into the staff area, my heart in my throat. The plaster shook with each impact. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Then, silence. I took a breath and reached for the desk phone to call someone, anyone, but froze. A voice spoke from behind me. "You're making the same mistakes I did." I turned slowly. The man from the diner was standing there. Same threadbare coat. Same tired eyes. He looked even older now, like he'd aged decades in a week since I'd last seen him. "You were the guard before me," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded. "And before me, there were others. The station keeps us. It doesn't let go until it's ready." "What happens if you break the rules?" I asked. His eyes darkened. "You stop being the guard. And you become something else." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "The doubles?" I asked. He didn't answer, just glanced toward the door. "You'll see." And then he was gone. No sound, no movement, just gone. At 3:27, I heard the sound of something being dragged across the roof. Heavy. Wet. It circled slowly, then stopped directly above me. A shadow fell across the front window. I looked up, and my stomach lurched. Hanging upside down from the roof, face pressed to the glass, was my double. His mouth moved soundlessly, but his eyes were wide with terror, like he was begging me for help. A single drop of thick, black liquid slid down the glass from where his forehead touched it. I turned away. Rule 6. The pumps hissed suddenly, the sound sharp in the silence. I checked the gauge. It was draining, fast. From the corner of my eye, I saw shapes moving between the trees. Low, hunched, crawling on all fours. Their limbs were too long, their heads too low, their bodies twitching unnaturally. The hiss grew louder. The pumps jerked and shuddered. The gauge was nearly at 0. The pounding started again, all around the building this time. The walls shook. The lights flickered. Then everything went still. The pumps refilled in seconds, the gauge swinging back to full. The shapes in the forest froze, then retreated into the mist. I was left in the silent humming station, staring at the counter. The photograph was gone. In its place was another note, written in the same shaky handwriting. "Next shift, rules will change." The note haunted me all day. Next shift, rules will change. What did that even mean? I'd spent every second clinging to the original 7 like they were my lifeline, and now, suddenly, the foundation beneath me was crumbling. When I got to the station for my last shift, the sun was a thin smear behind thick, roiling clouds. The forest seemed even darker, the pines bending toward the clearing like sinister sentinels. I locked the door behind me and noticed immediately, the laminated rules sheet was gone. In its place, taped crudely to the counter, was a new list. 7 lines, handwritten in shaky, urgent scrawl. 1. The front door must stay open from midnight till 2:13 a.m. 2. Allow anyone who asks for the other road inside, do not refuse. 3. The pumps must run dry before sunrise. 4. Speak to your double if they come inside, do not ignore them. 5. Answer the payphone immediately. 6. Turn off the outside lights at 2:13 exactly. 7. If you want to leave, break a rule. I stared at the paper, heart pounding. It was the exact opposite of everything I'd been told. The rules had flipped, turned inside out, like the station itself was testing me. I hesitated, then stuffed the paper into my jacket pocket. I had no choice but to follow them now. At midnight, I pulled the front door open. The cold night air rushed in, swirling with fog and the scent of pine and gasoline. The canopy lights buzzed, but the outside lights were still burning bright. Rule 6 said to keep them on until 2:13. Minutes passed in eerie silence. Then, footsteps approached. A woman stepped through the mist. She looked normal at first, jeans, leather jacket, eyes sharp and focused. Then she smiled, and I saw it. The same wide, unnatural grin as the man from the first night, the black oil eyes that saw everything and nothing. "Which way to the other road?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard, opened the door wider. She stepped inside. The station's lights flickered and dimmed. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive weight. At 1:30, the payphone rang. I picked it up, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello." A whisper came back. A voice I knew, my double's voice, fragile and pleading. "Don't trust the rules. They lie. They want you." The line went dead. Outside, the pumps hissed and spluttered. The gauge dropped steadily, inching toward empty. At 2:12, the lights snapped off. Darkness swallowed the station. The fog pressed in like a living thing. From the mist emerged dozens of shapes, twisted, crawling, dripping with black sludge. They surrounded the station, knocking on the windows, howling low and hungry. I ran to the door, but it slammed shut on its own. My double appeared beside me, voice steady despite the chaos. "Break a rule," he said. "It's the only way out." But which one? I remembered the original list, the new one, and the terrible cost of breaking them. Heart-hammering, I ripped the new rules from the counter and tore them up. The moment the last scrap floated to the floor, the outside lights flickered on, bathing the lot in harsh white glow. The creatures screamed, their forms dissolving into mist. The door unlocked. I ran into the dawn, never looking back. Weeks later, I still see my double in dreams, waiting for the next guard to make the same mistakes. And somewhere deep in the forest, the gas station waits too, its pumps thirsty, its rules deadly, and its doors never truly closed.